there's another rulemaking going through the FMC, and this one is talking about pass-through charges. Do I have your attention? Hi, welcome to By Land and by Sea, an attorney breaking down the week in supply chain, presented by the Maritime Professor, me. I'm Lauren Beagen, founder of the Maritime Professor and Squall Strategies, and I'm your favorite maritime attorney. Join me every week as we walk through both ocean transport and surface transport topics in the wild world of supply chain. As always, the guidance here is general and for educational purposes only. It should not be construed to be legal advice, and there is no attorney-client privilege created by this video. If you need an attorney, contact an attorney. So before we get into the discussion of the day, let's go through my top 3 stories of the week. So story number 1. This week, the FMC said that the 3 ocean alliances, the 2M Alliance, the Ocean Alliance, and the Alliance, or THE Alliance, will be subjected to heightened reporting requirements. The FMC released the other day, I believe yesterday, that the 3 alliances will now be required to provide enhanced pricing and capacity information, and that this will provide the FMC with uniform data to use in assessing ocean carrier behavior and marketplace competitiveness. I love that, uniform behavior. This is new information, and I'm encouraged by the standardization and the uniformity reference. This is going to help the FMC truly monitor the alliances and their actual competitiveness in the market against each other and the market as a whole. Look, I posted about this on LinkedIn, and there's been some good discussions here already. So historically, alliances have globally been accepted when they're around the 20-25%, but usually kind of no more than 30% market share marker. And that's been reported as generally accepted threshold for the ocean shipping global regulating bodies. So that's China, Ministry of Transport, that's European Commission, Director General for Competition, DG Comp for European Union, and the Federal Maritime Commission. Now, these days, it seems to still be roughly the acceptable threshold, but the visibility into that number is a little less reliable. So standardization is always a good thing. And I like that the FMC is putting the onus on the ocean carrier to provide that accurate and more detailed data. So I said it's on the alliances. Obviously, it's on the businesses of the alliances, the alliance itself, you know what I mean. So I'm interested in the legal authority for this increased reporting, though. Is it being tied to the FMC's general authority to monitor and request information from the alliances? I suspect it is. The FMC kind of mentioned that it was. But the FMC's legal authority for oversight, as I said in my LinkedIn post, that might be a topic for another post to dive further into that. But, look, greater visibility for the regulators and standardizing that oversight is certainly a step in the right direction, and certainly in this case. But look, it's a good thing here, but that's as long as it doesn't rise to the level of debilitating or prohibitively cumbersome on the businesses to conduct their business. But I don't think we're anywhere near that here. But I'd like to just say that it's not a blanket statement that this that regulation in general can edge over into overregulation. But I think this reviewing, this monitoring, this is within the purview of the FMC, and this is certainly something that I'm happy to see a little bit more visibility here. So story number 2. Look, we're almost there. Next week, the labor discussion on the West Coast kicks off. Yes, the labor discussion. So this is the International Longshore and Warehouse Union, the ILWU, which is essentially the West Coast Labor Union, and the Pacific Maritime Association, PMA, which is essentially the shipping lines and the terminals at 29 West Coast ports. So besides the obvious, we have crazy profits, strained working conditions through the pandemic, et cetera, et cetera. There's a little bit of new heat leading up to this discussion. There's a little new heat heating up for this discussion. The ILWU took to Twitter, yes, the war is waged on Twitter, took to Twitter to say that a new report that the PMA, the Pacific Maritime Association, released promoting the benefits of port promoting the benefits of port automation is self-serving. So the ILWU took to Twitter to say that the PMA released a new report saying and promoting the benefits of port automation. They said that it was self-serving. The Maritime Executive reported this. I'll link to the article in the show notes. Here we go, folks. Conversation kicks off next week. Look, let's hope it's a smooth negotiation. So story number 3. I made a post this week about being the anniversary of my first year as an entrepreneur, and I have been overwhelmed by the outpouring of love and support. It's been so great. You guys are the best group to be connected to. I've really enjoyed, I've had a lot of conversations over the past few months, even about how valuable LinkedIn has become, how the conversation has turned to LinkedIn as a platform. And I have to agree, I really, really, really have valued all of my conversations, all of my networking that I've done through LinkedIn, and the ability to do this video show. Maybe one day will turn into a podcast, but currently just lives on LinkedIn and gets streamed out to Twitter and YouTube. But really, it was this LinkedIn audience that gave me the support that I needed. I imagine most people go through a whole bunch of stuff as they venture into the unknown. And as I wrote in my post, there's some days I second guess every move and research the heck out of every new business idea. And then other days, ideas flow with fully scripted plans and full confidence. It's such a wild ride. It's such an exhilarating one. I have loved this journey. My mission has always been to help the industry that I'm so passionate about. And really, what a fun way to do that. So, really, I want to say thank you to everybody for joining me on this ride. Like many, I've had more help and support than I deserve, and I'm so indebted for everyone's kindness along the way. It's a feeling of inspired creation and endless possibility. It really is intoxicating. It's learning new platforms. It's adjusting on the fly. It's connecting with everybody out there, and it's really helping this industry that I know a lot of others are so passionate about. Maritime gets in your blood. Supply chain gets in your blood. I think we all have a little bit of grit because we're in this industry. And, I just want to say thank you. This was only the first year. More to come. Keep following. I'm so excited to see what comes next. So let's get into the meat and potatoes of the day. So I'm going to cover a rulemaking that, at least for me, has been flying below the radar. And I really want to thank Rebecca Fenneman for bringing this to my attention. So Rebecca is the principal and founder of Jeffrey Fenneman Law and Strategy and is a wealth of information in the industry. She's actually a former colleague of mine at the FMC as well, but she is just so valuable with her insights in maritime industry, ocean shipping world, and certainly the FMC. So Rebecca posted about the carrier automation tariffs notice of proposed rulemaking, and admittedly, I missed it. So what happened here? Let's break it down today. So the FMC released a notice of proposed rulemaking on April 29th. So this is the notice of proposed rulemaking. We've talked about detention and demurrage having the advance notice of proposed rulemaking, the ANPRM. This is that next step. So we move from the advance notice of proposed rulemaking to now just a notice of proposed rulemaking. So usually at this stage, there's some language involved. And by gosh, that's what we have here. So guess what? This rulemaking also actually had an advance notice stage. They don't always have to have that advance notice, but they did. So the FMC on April 8th, 2021, so that's last year, released an advance notice of proposed rulemaking. And the very first line that they wrote in that advance notice of proposed rulemaking was, the Federal Maritime Commission has identified inconsistencies in the manner in which different carriers are interpreting and applying certain aspects of the Commission's rules. I mean, to me, that says they're setting up to dive in here. They have identified inconsistencies, so they're going to be looking at it. So they continue. This advance notice of proposed rulemaking, ANPRM, will facilitate a fuller understanding of these issues prior to the Commission potentially proposing regulatory changes to its tariff regulations. How did we miss this? I don't know if you missed this. I missed this. So what's going on here? So the Commission was finding that carriers are charging widely varying fees and imposing varying minimum requirements for access to common carrier tariffs. So the FMC wanted to learn more about this. What are the impacts of such fees and minimum requirements of public access to common carrier rules, rates, practices, and charges and published tariffs, and whether these existing fees or requirements are unreasonable. So what's happening here is that the carrier might be charging like a basic fee, just a minimal fee, or they might be requiring some sort of signing up for their service, signing up for their website, login requirements. But maybe it might have actually risen to the level of burdensome, and that's what the FMC wanted to see. And, while they were at it, the FMC also wanted to learn about the NVOCCs and their pass-through charges, so non-vessel operating common carriers. So here's a quick background briefer. So the Shipping Act, the congressionally created law, it's a statute that gives the FMC its authority, requires that common carriers keep their tariffs showing all rates, charges, classifications, rules, and practices open for public inspection, and that they are made available electronically to any person without time, quantity, or other limitation. So the FMC, through their regulations, so that's their application of the congressionally created law to kind of common practice, said that they would allow for charging a reasonable fee for such access to the tariffs, save any federal agency requesting the information. So at the time, think about it. So, they wanted to make sure that it wasn't going to be burdensome on the carrier to be publishing these tariffs so that people could still see them kind of in an open publishing way. So let's talk about this. So let's talk about the reasonable fee. So prior to the Ocean Shipping Reform Act of 1998, we've talked about the Ocean Shipping Reform Act that's going through right now, Congress. It's still in the conference stage. But in 1998, Ocean Shipping Reform Act, so this was Congress was looking at the Shipping Act and a few different areas that they could make some amendments to. Carriers and conference tariffs were published with the FMC prior to 1998. They were published directly through the FMC's automated tariff filing and information system. So after OSRA in 1998, so after the Ocean Shipping Reform Act, that requirement was actually eliminated. So this was kind of a partial deregulation moment for shipping. And now tariffs were allowed to be published in carrier automated tariff systems, so a little bit more directly instead of having to go through the FMC. So in 1999, 2000, the FMC issued some guidance basically saying that a reasonable charge for access to automated tariff filing information should be only used to cover costs and expenses incurred by the carriers in making their tariffs accessible to the public. So look, why was the FMC saying that, okay, we're going to allow you to cover your costs? We think about it now. What costs? What costs did they have? Look, this was the age of maybe dial-up. It was maybe a little clunky to access the internet in general. We're talking 1990, 2000. So they wanted to make sure it wasn't overly burdensome to publish the tariffs because the ultimate goal was to have the tariffs accessible on the internet. Like I said, prior to OSRA 98, that was the time when they were supposed to go straight to the FMC. So now they're moving that over to the individual carrier, but they want to make sure that that access to the tariff is still so readily available and it's not going to become a burden on the carrier. So they thought, okay, look, if you have basic costs, we want you to be able to cover that because we don't want this to be a burden. We don't want to limit access to the tariffs. So now we all know that it's very inexpensive to be publishing onto websites or onto the internet. So in reviewing the matter, the FMC found that some carriers self-publishing their tariffs may require a login, okay, but after that point, the tariff is free to access. Okay, that's probably expected. However, they also found that other carriers were charging for access, and maybe surprise, surprise, in some cases the charge appeared to be excessive. So why would customers want access to these tariffs at all? I mean, well, the obvious reason is so that they know the charges associated with the shipment of the cargo. But what about the service contracts? So these are where the negotiated contracts that are between the carrier and the shipper. So where the shipper commits to provide a certain minimum quantity of cargo over a fixed period of time, and the ocean common carrier then commits to a certain rate or rate schedule and a defined level of service. So the service contracts are then filed with the FMC. This is current day. The service contracts are filed with the FMC for monitoring, although they do remain confidential. So these negotiated rates, they negotiate the rates and minimum quantities, but not all terms are actually covered in these service contracts. And usually where the term might not be covered, the tariff usually fills in that gap. So the publicly available tariff fills in that gap. And it seems like you should be able to see the tariff if this mystery document is part of your service contract, right? It seems like maybe that's where the FMC is going with this. So in the advance notice of proposed rulemaking, so this was the April 2021 release, the commission asked 3 questions. So 1, do you agree or disagree with the reasonable charge for access to cover essentially the simple overhead of publishing the tariff? 2, what is your experience with this? Charging and covering simple overhead costs, and do you actually have examples of seeing this out in the wild? And 3, are you inhibited from accessing common carrier tariffs because of tariff fees or tariff access process? So like I said, the FMC was also talking about pass-through charges. So those were the 3 questions posed in the advance notice of proposed rulemaking for the automated tariff filing systems or self-filing. With the pass-through charges, the FMC was looking to answer 6 questions. So for VOCCs, vessel operating common carriers, what are the typical charges that are not under its control and for which the ocean carrier merely acts as a collection agent? So we've heard this come up a lot in the D&D side of things. Vessel operating common carriers acting as the collection agent. So the second question for VOCCs, how does its tariff specifically or address, how does its tariff specify or address those charges for which it merely acts as a collection agent? So in the tariff, do they talk about the areas that they are just a collections agent? For an NVOCC, what are the typical charges that are not under its control and for which the NVOCC merely acts as a collections agent? And also for the NVOCC, how does its tariff specify or address those charges for which it is merely the collections agent? Does it list that? Does it say these are passed through, we only collect on behalf of somebody else? Question number 5, how do common carriers communicate to shippers that the so-called pass-through charges for the account or are for the account of the shippers? And question number 6, how can shippers be assured that common carriers collect pass-through charges without adding any markups? Isn't that the question? Geez, look, these seem like some important questions. This happened last April 2021. So that was all part of the ANPRM, the Advance Notice Proposed Rulemaking, the advance notice stage last year, 2021 in April. You guys, there were 3 comments received. 3. I mean, talk about people having woken up to the FMC these days. There were 3 comments received last year. So one was from the National Customs Broker and Forwarders Association of America, NCBFA. I think we call it NCBFA still. So National Customs Broker and Forwarders Association of America. There was also comments from the Association of Food Industries. And thirdly, New York, New Jersey Foreign Freight Forwarders and Brokers Association. Look, when I say that people are waking up to the FMC and its authorities, this is what I mean. The detention and demurrage rule, the D&D rule that we've been talking about a lot on By Land and By Sea here, had over 80 comments filed. Last year in April, 3 comments. 3 comments. So where are we now? So we're at the notice of proposed rulemaking stage. So last April, advance notice of proposed rulemaking, 3 comments came in. The FMC digested those 3 comments. And now, this April, they released their notice of proposed rulemaking stage. I don't expect the detention and demurrage second stage, the notice of proposed rulemaking, to take as long as a year. I think that the notice, the second phase for the detention and demurrage rule will go a lot faster. But this is where we are for this rule. So this rule, the pass-through and the automated tariff, this took about a year for them to digest those comments. Yeah, there's a lot been going on at the FMC. Like I said, they are a very lean agency. They need more people working there. But in the meantime, it took them a year. They got now to the notice of proposed rulemaking stage. So the FMC has released some proposed draft language and direction on what they're going to be changing. So it's open right now. The notice of proposed rulemaking, not advance notice, but the notice of proposed rulemaking is open. It's currently open. Comments are due roughly May 28th. So they're due on a 30-day dependent comment filing period. And it's dependent on when it actually hits the Federal Register. So one section of the NPRM, that's the acronym for the Notice of Proposed Rulemaking, so the second stage, one section of the NPRM that I love, the Commission says, a competitive and efficient ocean transportation system is dependent on transparency and availability of price information to the shipping public. It is the belief of the Commission that any unnecessary roadblocks to that transparency, including cost barriers to tariff access, are contrary to that goal. I mean, this is great. You guys, I keep promoting and saying that I think that the FMC is on the right track here, and saying things like anything that is hindering transparency is bad. I mean, we love to see it. They continue. The Commission has learned that a limited number of carriers are charging unreasonably high fees that prevent public access to tariffs. The Commission's implementing regulations were written at a time when dial-up internet via public switched telephone networks was the norm, and information was not as easily posted or located as is the case now. I mentioned that just a little bit ago, didn't I? Intervening technology developments and efficiencies have made it nearly essential for businesses to operate a free, publicly accessible website. So this is interesting. The FMC says 7 of the top 10 carriers that serve the US make their tariffs available on their websites at no cost. So 7 of the top 10 carriers. That means 3 of the top 10 carriers, the adverse of that, 3 of the top 10 carriers are not making their tariffs available on their websites at no cost. Okay, the FMC continues. With the ubiquity of websites among carriers, the decreases in the costs of providing information online, the efficiency of providing public access through a website, and the prevalence of free and open access to tariffs among the largest carriers, the Commission believes that free public access to tariffs is reasonable. I see a shift here coming, guys. I think it sounds like tariffs are going to be required to be free and published on the websites. So, what's going on? The Commission is proposing to require carriers provide free access to tariffs by removing the option to assess a fee for tariff access currently found in the regs. Great. Look, FMC is breaking down barriers. Love to see it. The Commission is welcoming comments on what costs the carriers will incur in order to provide free access to tariffs, and they want comments from carriers who don't charge. They want to understand why they don't charge. So there are people out there right now, we said 7 of the top 10 who aren't charging. They want to know why, just to make sure that they're not missing anything, make sure that there aren't any impediments to access of that free tariff. They want to cover everything here, not just the obvious. They don't want to just rely on the obvious. So, like I said, they're also talking about pass-through charges here. So let's go back to the pass-through piece. So the FMC discusses that VOCCs are required to provide 30 days notice for tariff rate increases. So VOCCs, but the NVOCCs are also required to provide 30 days notice. So the VO might be increasing a rate, and then now the NVOCC that might collect on behalf of the VOCC is also required to provide 30 days notice. So the VO says, we're going to up this rate, and they post it out. NVO, if they don't catch it that day, if they don't catch it maybe for 5 days, that's 5 days that now they're behind the VO's 30-day notice. It's supposed to be a pass-through rate. And so now the NVO, for those 5 days that they missed the tariff filing change of the NVO, of the VO, now that NVO is going to have to eat those 5 days. So the comments received essentially said that the NVOs can't always catch when the VOs change their rates. And so the NVO, the non-vessel operating common carrier, may be off on their pass-through increase rate and then may lose that money in being compliant with their own 30-day notice. So I think the FMC decided to take a pretty reasonable approach here. They're considering adding a new section to allow an NVOCC to cross-reference a VOCC's tariff for certain specified subcharges and accessorial charges. So basically, in these subcharges or these, these surcharges, essentially, if the VO increases and the NVO is collecting on behalf of the VO, they're saying, look, NVO, you don't need to publish it separately. Why don't you just refer back to the VO's publication? And that way, it's a pass-through charge. There's no upcharging there. So they're not waiving the NVO's requirement of a 30 days notice for rate changes in general, but they are trying to eliminate the problem of a double notice for essentially the same charge. Since remember, we're talking about the pass-through charges here. So the Commission also said they hope and think that this will in turn provide greater visibility and transparency for this whole area. I agree here. I think that if they can be cross-referencing, that eliminates the second publishing of the same charge. And really, it's on the shipper to go back and see, is this the same charge? Is there inconsistency in this charge? Is the NVO upcharging this? So next, the FMC talks about charges incurred by the VO that may not allow for 30 days notice. So these might be canal tolls, taxes, etc. And it's in cases where notice of change of rate is not given to the VO. So like the canal toll charge changed, VO still has to pay it, but they weren't giving any notice that it was going to be changing. But this is where it gets tough. The NVO, the non-vessel operating common carrier, gets caught here. So the VOCC doesn't have to provide the notice, but with no current cross-reference allowance, the NVO now has to provide 30 days notice. So the VO, canal toll charges go up, and they pass it through, or the NVO it collects on behalf of, but the NVO has to give 30 days notice for these charges to go through. So the buck gets passed down to the NVO to shoulder the burden of the increased charge for canal tolls. This doesn't seem right. Do you kind of follow what I'm saying here? So the FMC proposes to add another section to their regs that addresses this, explicitly stating that the NVOCCs can pass through charges not under the control of an ocean carrier in the same manner that the VOs don't have to publish the 30 days notice. So the FMC notes this pass-through charge is one with no markup. So this is supposed to be no markup. Why would you be marking up a canal charge? It's an unexpected pass-through. Well, maybe you were, let's talk about why would somebody be marking this up? Obviously, administrative fees, but maybe you were marking it up. Maybe that's not a nefarious reason. Maybe you were marking it up because instead of eating the 30 days notice, so a markup provided a little overhead for the just in case moment of these charges so that you didn't have to eat that 30 days notice. NVOs were getting the brunt of this, that it was being passed down the chain here. And so maybe they created an administrative or an overhead surcharge off of that pass-through charge just for the off chance, because they didn't want to keep getting hit with all of these charges that really weren't fair to them. So a markup provided a little overhead for that just in case moment. Look, the visibility here will eliminate the markup and the shouldering of the burden by the NVOs. This is great for transparency progress. I'll admit, it all feels a little in the weeds, doesn't it? This is a federal agency. But I think that this is where we are as an industry. Maybe some of these now seemingly bad markups were just, smart business decisions to help float those unexpected charges and rates that were unfairly passed down the chain. Do you have more examples of unfairly passed down chain things like this? I bet the FMC would actually want to hear about it. I suggest you make a list, send it in, see what they say. I don't think that they would have even noticed, or I think that this might have gone unnoticed. This canal charge gets upcharged. VO doesn't have to shoulder that change, but the NVO, who's supposed to be just passing through now, has to shoulder that change. It's a very particular moment. If you know of other ones just like that, I say send them in. I think that you should contact the FMC and send that in, because I think that they're trying to clear things up. They want the visibility here, and they're trying to eliminate bad acting. And whether it was initially for a good reason or not, I think that this is something the FMC is really trying to clear up. So in this section, the FMC says, the Commission believes that clarity facilitates consistency in the application of regulations, which in turn provides a measure of assurance to the shippers that certain practices will be carried out uniformly among common carriers. The nature of pass-through charges, such that a shipper may not know the amount of a particular charge in advance, can deny full transparency to the shipper prior to being invoiced for such a charge. More recently, as expressed by all commenters, all three of them, there's an increased number and variety of additional fees and frequent charges to those fees, which have escalated the chances that a shipper is unaware of the final cost. So, not surprisingly, the commenters made comments on detention and demurrage billing practices. So the FMC remarks on that and basically says, we're going to direct you over to the detention and demurrage ANPRM rulemaking. We've talked about that many times before, 22-04. But they said, look, we're not going to talk about detention and demurrage here. We have a whole, streamline for D&D. Let's take the conversation over there. This rulemaking also talks about co-loading. So the Commission also addresses co-loading in this rulemaking. This is the co-loading, as the name suggests, of multiple NVOCC cargo to receive a better rate as a full cargo load, an FCL. So instead of getting an eighth of the box rate with an LCL rate, a less than carrier load, you can combo with all of your friends and say, we want a rate on a full box. Look, it's easier for the carrier because they just are booking full boxes, and it's arguably better for the NVO because they're getting the better rate of the full box. But the trouble is there's not a lot of visibility here. So the FMC has an idea. They want to up the documentation requirements so that the FCL, the full cargo load, shipments are annotated with the name of all NVOCCs associated with the cargo. The annotation requirement ensures that for either co-loaded cargo or full container loads, the BCO, the beneficial cargo owner, has the information required to contact any NVOCC which may have control of its cargo. I mean, that's pretty good. I like the direction that we're heading here. Those are the highlights of what's happening. Like I said, it was off my radar. It's back on my radar. I'm going to be watching this. I think that there's some really important steps that are happening for kind of tariff management, both inside the nitty gritty of the tariff and also just as a practice for access to the tariffs. We should be able to access the tariffs if we want to know what the charges are. The charges are not supposed to be secretive. They're not supposed to be behind closed door. Well, they're, other than service contracts, but they're not supposed, these publicly accessed tariffs are supposed to be available so that you know what the charges are and the rules for that matter. Some tariffs also have rules as well as the rates. So I wanted to cover the major topics so that you can get more in, so that we can actually get more input from the industry on what's going on. I think the FMC really wants more input on a lot of different areas, and they really want people to engage with what they're doing. So these are the hot topics, the biggest hits of the NPRM here for the notice of proposed rulemaking on the FMC. You have 30 days to pull your comments together, or, as we saw with the ANPRM, to request additional time if you feel strongly that you actually need more time to collect your thoughts. I encourage you to check out this docket yourself. It's docket 21-03. It's the carrier automated tariffs, and it covers, like we said, carrier automated tariffs and also pass-through charges. And I think that those pass-through charges, I think a lot of people are going to have some thoughts on that, and I think that you should be looking at this rulemaking, discussing with your constituents, discussing with your business partners, discussing amongst yourself what needs to be changed to help create more visibility, and if the FMC is hitting that mark. Are they providing those changes needed? Look, the guidance here is general and for educational purposes. It should not be construed to be legal advice directly related to your matter. If you need an attorney, contact an attorney. But if you do have specific legal questions about any of this, feel free to reach out to me at my legal company, Squall Strategies. Otherwise, for the non-legal questions, e-learning, and general industry information and insights, come find me at the Maritime Professor. If you like these videos, let me know. Comment, like, and share. If you missed any previous videos, these videos live on my YouTube page, By Land and by Sea, presented by the Maritime Professor. And while you're at it, check out the new website, themaritimeprofessor.com. So until next week, this is Lauren Beagen, the Maritime Professor, and you've just listened to By Land and by Sea. See you next time.